maybe not just yet. I know it may look unconventional. Believe me, we won't be keeping him there for long. Tommy's going through a rebellious phase.
I'm gonna obliterate you the second I get out of here!
It's quite impressive, really, how you've managed to aimlessly float through your whole life completely unnoticed.
You're scared, aren't you?
Would you think all of this is funny? This is real life.
You're already dead, you scum!
We treat each other with respect. Bad boy! Bad boy! Bad boy! Bad boy! Bad boy!
I would like to apologise for what I did to you. I promise not to do it again.
Good boy.
Fear always brings self-destruction. Open your mind and invite progress. Progress.
I think it's time.
Progress.
See it as a sign of our trust in you and the progress you've made. Which is better, blissful stupor or dealing with...
Sometimes it's your only chance to get out your head. I know someone else used to live here. What did you do to him?
Progress.
I'm so proud of you, son. You protected this family today.
You're not my family. This isn't real.
Tommy.
What if the worst person you know was kidnapped, chained in a basement, and re educated by a family that truly believed they were saving him? Would you call it justice, madness, or something even darker? That disturbing question sits at the heart of Good Boy, a twisted psychological thriller from director Jan Komasa that turns a simple kidnapping story into an unsettling exploration of morality, family, trauma, punishment, and redemption. The film refuses to give easy answers. Instead, it places viewers in an uncomfortable position where every character is both victim and villain in different ways. By the time the credits roll, audiences are left wondering whether people can truly change and whether forcing someone to become good is itself an act of evil. What if some kidnap the worst person you know, not to kill him, not to torture him, but to make him a better human being? That strange and disturbing idea sits at the center of Good Boy, one of the most thought provoking psychological thrillers of 2025. Directed by Jan Komasa, the film takes a simple premise and transforms it into something much deeper. It is a story about punishment, redemption, morality, family, trauma, and the dangerous belief that one person has the right to decide how another person should live. At first glance, Good Boy may look like a typical kidnapping thriller. A young troublemaker suddenly disappears and wakes up trapped in the basement of a remote house. But what follows is not the kind of story audiences expect. The people who kidnapped him do not want money, they do not want revenge, they claim they want to save him. The film follows Tommy, a reckless and violent young man who spends his life creating chaos wherever he goes. He has little respect for rules, authority, or other people. His behavior affects everyone around him and he seems completely unaware of the damage he causes. One day his life changes forever when he is abducted by a middle aged couple named Chris and Catherine. When Tommy wakes up chained in their basement, he expects the worst. Instead, he is told something that sounds almost ridiculous. Chris and Catherine insist that they are not his enemies. They believe they can help him become a better person. Their mission is not punishment but rehabilitation. From that moment, the audience enters a psychological battle unlike anything seen in most thrillers. Tommy refuses to cooperate. Chris refuses to give up. Catherine watches everything unfold while hiding emotional scars of her own. As days become weeks, the line between victim and villain becomes increasingly blurred. One of the most impressive aspects of Good Boy is how quickly it creates discomfort. The audience knows kidnapping is wrong. There is no debate about that. Yet the film continuously presents situations that challenge simple judgments. Tommy has done terrible things. Chris genuinely seems convinced that he is helping. The viewer becomes trapped in a moral gray area where every answer creates new questions. Jan Kumasa has always shown an interest in complicated human behavior. In Good Boy, he explores the idea that people often justify terrible actions when they believe they are serving a greater purpose. Chris never sees himself as a criminal. In his mind, he is doing what society failed to do. He believes Tommy has become a danger to himself and everyone around him. By forcing discipline and responsibility upon him, Chris thinks he is giving the young man a second chance. The terrifying part is that Chris is not portrayed as a monster. He appears kind, patient, and even caring at times. He cooks meals, he offers advice, he talks about family and responsibility, yet every act of kindness exists within the context of imprisonment. Every lesson is backed by chains and locked doors. This contradiction creates the film's greatest strength. Viewers never feel comfortable choosing a side. Tommy can be selfish, cruel, and aggressive. Chris can be compassionate and thoughtful. Yet Tommy is the prisoner and Chris is the captor. The film constantly reminds audiences that human beings are rarely as simple as heroes and villains. A major reason the story works so well is the performance of the cast. Stephen Graham delivers one of the most powerful performances of his career as Chris. He brings incredible depth to the role, making the character both sympathetic and frightening. One moment he feels like a caring father figure. The next moment he becomes a terrifying reminder of how dangerous obsession can be. Andrea Riseborough gives Catherine a quiet intensity that slowly reveals itself throughout the film. At first she seems distant and reserved. As the story progresses, audiences discover the pain and grief hidden beneath her calm appearance. Her performance adds emotional weight to every scene she shares with Chris and Tommy. Anson Boone faces perhaps the most difficult challenge as Tommy. The character spends much of the film confined to one location, yet Boone keeps him engaging from beginning to end. He captures Tommy's anger, fear, arrogance, and vulnerability with remarkable authenticity. As more layers of the character are revealed, the audience begins to understand that Tommy is more than just a violent troublemaker. The chemistry between the actors is one of the film's greatest achievements. Their interactions feel natural and believable. Conversations often begin calmly before slowly becoming tense and unpredictable. Some of the most memorable scenes involve nothing more than three people sitting in a room talking, yet the tension feels almost unbearable. Behind the scenes, the development of Good Boy took several years. The filmmakers wanted to create a story that combined psychological suspense with emotional depth. Rather than focusing on action or shock value, they concentrated on character relationships. Every decision in the script was designed to serve the emotional conflict between Tommy and his captors. The screenplay carefully balances drama, suspense, dark humor, and social commentary. This balance prevents the film from becoming repetitive despite its limited setting. Each conversation reveals new information. Every confrontation changes the relationship between the characters. The audience is constantly discovering something new about the people on screen. The title Good Boy becomes increasingly important as the story unfolds. At first, it sounds harmless, almost affectionate. It brings to mind childhood memories of praise and encouragement. As the film progresses, however, those words take on a much darker meaning. The phrase becomes a symbol of control. It raises uncomfortable questions about obedience and conformity. Who decides what makes someone good? What happens when goodness is enforced rather than chosen? The film never provides easy answers. Instead, it encourages viewers to think for themselves. Some audience members may view Chris as a dangerous fanatic. Others may see him as a desperate man trying to correct a broken system. Some may sympathize with Tommy. Others may struggle to forgive his actions. The beauty of the film lies in its refusal to simplify these questions. Visually, Good Boy creates an atmosphere of constant unease. The cinematography emphasizes confinement and isolation. The basement feels claustrophobic and oppressive. Even scenes outside the house carry a sense of tension. The filmmakers use lighting and camera movement to reflect the psychological state of the characters. Every frame contributes to the growing sense that something terrible could happen at any moment. The production design also deserves praise. The house itself becomes a character within the story. It appears ordinary on the surface, yet hidden beneath it is a world built around secrecy and control. This contrast mirrors the personalities of Chris and Catherine. They appear normal from the outside, but beneath that normality exists something deeply unsettling. The music plays an important role in establishing mood. Rather than relying on loud orchestral cues, the score often uses subtle sounds and haunting melodies. The result is a feeling of dread that slowly creeps into every scene. The music never overwhelms the story. Instead, it quietly enhances the emotional impact of key moments. As the narrative progresses, the psychological battle between Tommy and Chris becomes increasingly complex. Neither man remains the same person they were at the beginning of the story. Tommy begins questioning his own choices and behavior. Chris starts confronting uncomfortable truths about himself and his motivations. Their relationship evolves in unexpected ways, creating some of the film's most powerful moments. The deeper the audience travels into the story, the more it becomes clear that Good Boy is not really about kidnapping. It is about the human desire to change other people. It is about the belief that we know what is best for someone else. It is about the dangers of allowing good intentions to justify harmful actions. By exploring these themes through the lens of a psychological thriller, the film remains entertaining while also encouraging reflection. Viewers leave the theater discussing not only what happened but what it means. Few modern thrillers manage to achieve both goals so effectively. Good Boy stands as a challenging, disturbing, and unforgettable experience. It is a film that asks difficult questions and refuses to provide comfortable answers. Through strong performances, intelligent writing, atmospheric direction, and powerful themes, it succeeds as both a gripping thriller and a thoughtful character study. Long after the credits roll, audiences are likely to continue debating its moral questions and unforgettable ending. One of the most fascinating aspects of Good Boy is how a story with such a simple premise manages to feel so rich and layered. Much of that success comes from the amount of preparation that happened before cameras ever started rolling. The filmmaker understood from the beginning that this was not a movie that could rely on explosions, car chases, or elaborate action sequences. The entire project depended on character development, emotional tension, and believable performances. The development process focused heavily on creating characters who felt real rather than symbolic. It would have been easy to write Tommy as nothing more than a violent troublemaker or Chris as a straightforward villain. Instead, the writers spent considerable time building complicated personalities with histories, flaws, and emotional wounds. Tommy's character was designed to represent a generation that has grown up in a world dominated by social media, instant gratification, and online attention. He constantly seeks excitement and validation. He records moments of chaos and treats life like a performance. Beneath his confidence, however, lies insecurity and confusion. He has never truly learned responsibility and he has spent much of his life avoiding consequences. Chris, on the other hand, represents a different kind of problem. He belongs to a generation that believes discipline, structure, and personal accountability can solve almost any issue. He is frustrated by what he sees as society's inability to correct destructive behavior. Over time, that frustration evolves into obsession. Instead of trusting institutions, he decides to take matters into his own hands. The writers understood that the conflict between these two characters would drive the entire story. Every scene was built around their opposing worldviews. Tommy believes freedom is the most important thing in life. Chris believes responsibility matters more than freedom. Their arguments become philosophical battles disguised as ordinary conversations. The film's dialogue reflects this approach. Rather than relying on dramatic speeches, the screenplay uses natural conversations that gradually reveal deeper ideas. A discussion about dinner can suddenly become a debate about morality. A casual joke can expose hidden emotional pain. This writing style keeps the audience engaged because every interaction serves multiple purposes at once. Casting became one of the most important stages of production. Finding actors capable of bringing these complicated characters to life was essential. The filmmakers knew audiences would spend much of the film watching the same handful of people interact. Strong performances were not simply desirable, they were absolutely necessary. Stephen Graham immediately emerged as a leading candidate for the role of Chris. Throughout his career, Graham has demonstrated a rare ability to combine toughness with vulnerability. He can appear intimidating without becoming one dimensional. He can express deep emotion without seeming weak. Those qualities made him an ideal choice for a character who constantly exists between sympathy and menace. Preparing for the role required a careful approach. Chris is not a traditional movie villain. He does not enjoy hurting people. He does not see himself as evil. In fact, he genuinely believes he is helping Tommy. Graham reportedly focused on understanding Chris's motivations rather than judging his actions. This approach allowed him to portray the character as a human being rather than a stereotype. The result is a performance filled with nuance. Chris often speaks softly. He remains calm in situations where other characters might lose control. Yet beneath that calm surface lies something deeply unsettling. The audience never forgets that he is holding another human being captive. Every act of kindness becomes complicated by that fact. Andrea Riseborough approached Catherine with a similar level of complexity. Catherine could easily have been reduced to the role of supportive spouse. Instead, she becomes one of the film's most intriguing characters. Riseborough brings emotional depth and subtlety to every scene. She communicates enormous amounts of information through small gestures and expressions. As the story unfolds, viewers begin to understand that Catherine carries her own emotional burdens. Her involvement in the kidnapping is connected to personal experiences that have shaped her worldview. She is not merely following Chris. She has her own reasons for believing in their mission. The relationship between Chris and Catherine is one of the film's strongest elements. They feel like a real married couple. Their conversations contain years of shared history, affection, frustration, and pain. Even when discussing shocking subjects, they interact with the familiarity of people who have spent decades together. This authenticity helps ground the story in reality. The audience can imagine these people existing outside the events of the film. They have routines, memories, and private struggles. They feel like individuals rather than fictional devices. Anson Boone's preparation for Tommy may have been the most demanding of all. Tommy begins the film as an unlikable character. He is arrogant, impulsive, and often cruel. The challenge was finding ways to maintain audience interest without immediately asking for sympathy. Boone accomplishes this by revealing small glimpses of vulnerability beneath Tommy's aggressive exterior. As the story progresses, audiences start to see moments of fear, loneliness, and self doubt. These moments do not excuse Tommy's actions, but they help explain them. One of the most impressive aspects of Boone's performance is his physical commitment. Much of the film takes place within confined spaces. He spends long periods chained, restrained, or trapped. Despite these limitations, he creates a dynamic and emotionally engaging character. His body language constantly reflects Tommy's changing emotional state. At the beginning, Tommy projects confidence and defiance. He refuses to cooperate. He mocks Chris and Catherine whenever possible. As weeks pass, however, that confidence begins to crack. Exhaustion, fear, and uncertainty slowly wear down his defenses. Boone captures this transformation with remarkable skill. The casting of younger supporting actors was equally important. These characters help reveal aspects of Chris and Catherine that would otherwise remain hidden. Through family interactions, flashbacks, and conversations, viewers gain a deeper understanding of the emotional wounds driving the story. Once the cast was assembled, rehearsals became a major focus. Because the film relies heavily on dialogue and emotional tension, the actors spent significant time exploring character relationships before filming began. This preparation helped create the natural chemistry visible on screen. Many scenes required a delicate balance between confrontation and empathy. Characters often argue fiercely while still maintaining emotional connections. Achieving this balance demands trust between performers. Rehearsals allowed the cast to build that trust and develop a shared understanding of the story's themes. Filming presented its own unique challenges. Unlike large scale productions that move between numerous locations, Good Boy spends much of its runtime in a relatively limited environment. This approach created practical difficulties for both cast and crew. The filmmakers needed to ensure that confined spaces never became visually repetitive. The audience had to feel trapped alongside Tommy without becoming bored. Achieving this goal required careful planning from the cinematography and production design teams. The basement, where much of the story takes place, became one of the most important locations in the film. It was designed not simply as a prison but as a reflection of Chris's mindset. Everything within the space serves a purpose. It is organized, controlled, and meticulously maintained. The environment communicates information about Chris long before he explains his beliefs. Lighting played a crucial role in shaping the atmosphere. Early scenes emphasize harsh shadows and uncertainty. As Tommy spends more time in captivity, the visual style evolves. The audience becomes increasingly familiar with the environment, yet it never feels safe. Instead, the house develops its own unsettling personality. The cinematographer reportedly approached the film as a psychological journey rather than a traditional thriller. Camera placement often reflects the emotional state of characters. Tight close ups emphasize confinement and tension. Wider shots highlight isolation and loneliness. One particularly effective technique involves the gradual shift in perspective. Early in the film, viewers primarily experience events through Tommy's eyes. Like him, they are confused and frightened. As the story progresses, the film begins spending more time with Chris and Catherine. This shift encourages audiences to understand their motivations even if they disagree with their actions. The production team paid close attention to visual details. Every room contains objects that reveal something about the people who live there. Family photographs, books, furniture, and decorations all contribute to storytelling. Nothing feels random or accidental. Costume design followed a similar philosophy. Clothing choices reflect personality and emotional development. Tommy's appearance changes throughout the film, subtly illustrating his transformation. Chris and Catherine's wardrobe reinforces their desire for order and normality. The filmmakers also worked hard to create a believable sense of time passing. Because the story unfolds over an extended period, audiences need to feel the gradual progression of days and weeks. Changes in appearance, behavior, lighting, and routine help communicate this passage of time. Music became another essential component of the film's emotional impact. Rather than overwhelming scenes with dramatic compositions, the score often remains understated. Quiet melodies and atmospheric sounds create tension without drawing attention away from performances. The composer understood that silence could be just as powerful as music. Some of the film's most uncomfortable moments occur in near silence. The absence of sound forces viewers to focus on every word, every movement, and every expression. When music does appear, it often reflects emotional states rather than specific actions. Instead of telling audiences how to feel, it deepens the mood already present within a scene. This subtle approach helps maintain the film's realistic tone. As production continued, everyone involved became aware that they were creating something unusual. Good Boy does not fit neatly into a single genre. It combines elements of psychological thriller, family drama, social commentary, and dark comedy. Maintaining balance between these different tones required constant attention. Too much humor could undermine tension, too much darkness could become exhausting, too much philosophy could slow the narrative. The filmmakers continually adjusted scenes to ensure the story remained engaging while preserving its emotional complexity. The result is a film that feels unpredictable. Viewers never know exactly where a scene will go. A conversation may become funny, heartbreaking, terrifying, or all three at once. This unpredictability keeps audiences emotionally invested from beginning to end. Perhaps the greatest achievement of the production process is that every creative decision serves the same central question: can a person truly change? The story explores this question from multiple angles without offering easy answers. Every character provides a different perspective. Every scene adds another layer to the debate. By the time filming was completed, the cast and crew had created something far more ambitious than a conventional thriller. They had built a story that challenges assumptions, provokes discussion, and lingers in the mind long after the final scene ends. And as the film moves toward its second half, the emotional stakes become even higher. Relationships grow more complicated, secrets begin to surface, and the audience starts realizing that the true conflict may not be about captivity at all. It may be about grief, guilt, and the desperate human need to believe that broken things can somehow be fixed. As filming moved deeper into production, the atmosphere on set reportedly became just as important as the technical aspects of the movie itself. Because Good Boy is such an emotionally intense story, the cast needed an environment where they could safely explore difficult emotions without losing the authenticity required for their performances. Unlike action films where excitement comes from large scale spectacle, this movie depends almost entirely on emotional truth. Every conversation carries weight, every silence matters, every glance between characters can change the audience's understanding of the story. For that reason, the director placed enormous emphasis on performance and character interaction. Many scenes required actors to remain emotionally present for extended periods. The basement sequences were especially demanding. Spending long hours in confined spaces can affect performers psychologically, even when everyone knows it is a fictional environment. The production team worked carefully to ensure the atmosphere remained professional and supportive while preserving the tension needed for the story. One of the challenges involved maintaining continuity of emotion. The story follows a gradual psychological transformation, but films are rarely shot in chronological order. Actors often had to perform scenes from the ending before filming scenes from the beginning. This required detailed preparation and a deep understanding of where each character stood emotionally at every stage of the narrative. Stephen Graham's portrayal of Chris benefits enormously from this careful planning. Throughout the film, Chris experiences subtle emotional shifts. At first, he appears completely confident in his mission. He believes he knows exactly what he is doing. As events unfold, however, cracks begin to appear in that certainty. These changes are rarely dramatic. Instead, they emerge through small details: a hesitation before speaking, a look of doubt, a moment of frustration quickly hidden behind a smile. These tiny moments gradually reveal a man struggling with his own beliefs. The cinematography plays a major role in highlighting these emotional developments. The camera frequently remains close to the actors, allowing audiences to observe every subtle expression. This approach creates intimacy while also generating discomfort. Viewers feel trapped within the emotional world of the characters. Close up shots become especially effective during confrontations between Tommy and Chris. Rather than relying on physical violence, many of their battles occur through conversation. The camera captures every reaction, making the audience feel like an unwilling participant in the conflict. The visual style of Good Boy is deliberately restrained. Modern thrillers often rely on flashy camera movements and rapid editing. This film takes a different approach. The camera is patient, it observes rather than distracts. Long takes allow tension to build naturally, giving performances room to breathe. This restraint makes moments of movement more impactful. When the camera suddenly shifts or follows a character through a space, the audience immediately senses a change in emotional energy. The filmmakers understand that suspense often comes from anticipation rather than surprise. Lighting serves a similarly important function. Different areas of the house possess distinct visual identities. Some rooms feel warm and inviting, others feel cold and oppressive. These contrasts reflect the emotional contradictions at the heart of the story. The family dining room, for example, often appears welcoming, meals are shared, conversations occur. On the surface, it resembles an ordinary family environment, yet the audience never forgets that Tommy is not there by choice. This knowledge transforms even the most innocent moments into something unsettling. The basement, meanwhile, evolves throughout the narrative. Initially, it appears frightening and unfamiliar. As Tommy spends more time there, viewers become accustomed to the environment, yet, familiarity does not bring comfort. Instead, the space takes on increasingly symbolic meaning. The basement becomes a representation of isolation, control, and forced transformation. It is a place where identities are challenged and beliefs are tested. By limiting Tommy's physical freedom, the story creates opportunities for deeper psychological exploration. The production design team deserves significant credit for creating an environment that feels realistic while also supporting the film's themes. Every object within the house appears carefully chosen. Nothing feels random. Family photographs, furniture, decorations, and personal belongings all contribute to storytelling. As audiences examine these details, they begin piecing together the history of Chris and Catherine's lives. The house becomes a silent witness to past joys, tragedies, and disappointments. It contains clues about the experiences that shaped the couple's worldview. Editing also plays a crucial role in maintaining suspense. The editors understood that tension does not always require rapid pacing. Sometimes allowing a moment to continue slightly longer than expected creates greater discomfort than any sudden shock. Throughout the film, scenes often end at unexpected points. Conversations are interrupted, questions remain unanswered. Important information is withheld until the perfect moment. This approach encourages viewers to remain actively engaged, constantly searching for meaning beneath the surface. Another notable aspect of the film is its use of dark humor. Although Good Boy deals with serious themes, it occasionally finds humor in absurd situations. This humor never feels forced. Instead, it emerges naturally from character interactions and the bizarre circumstances surrounding the story. Chris's attempts to create structure and discipline sometimes border on the ridiculous. Watching him apply parenting techniques to a kidnapped young man creates moments that are simultaneously funny and disturbing. The audience may laugh one moment and feel guilty for laughing the next. This balance between humor and discomfort is one of the film's greatest achievements. It reflects the complexity of real life, where absurdity often exists alongside tragedy. By embracing these contradictions, the film feels more authentic and emotionally rich. Music continues to support this delicate balance throughout the narrative. The score rarely announces itself. Instead, it operates almost invisibly, shaping emotional responses without drawing attention. Gentle piano melodies, atmospheric textures, and subtle orchestral elements create an underlying sense of unease. The composer understands that fear does not always come from loud sounds. Sometimes the most unsettling moments are accompanied by almost complete silence. In those scenes, every creak of the house, every breath, and every movement becomes significant. Sound design contributes enormously to the film's atmosphere. The house feels alive through its sounds. Footsteps echo through hallways, doors open and close. Distant noises drift through walls. These details create immersion while reinforcing Tommy's sense of confinement. As production neared completion, attention shifted towards shaping the final version of the story. Post production involved careful refinement of pacing, tone, and emotional rhythm. Because the film depends so heavily on audience perception, even small adjustments could significantly affect how scenes were interpreted. The editing team reportedly spent considerable time determining exactly how much information should be revealed and when. Revealing too much too early would reduce suspense. Revealing too little could create confusion. Finding the right balance required patience and precision. One of the most impressive aspects of the finished film is how naturally information unfolds. Audiences rarely feel manipulated. Instead, discoveries emerge through character interactions and emotional developments. This organic storytelling approach strengthens the film's impact. When the movie was finally completed, it began attracting attention within the international film community. Early screening generated strong reactions. Viewers often found themselves divided in their interpretations of the story. Some sympathized with Chris more than expected, others remained firmly on Tommy's side. Many struggled to decide exactly how they felt. This division became one of the film's greatest strengths. Rather than delivering a simple message, Good Boy encourages discussion. Different audiences often leave with entirely different conclusions. The film trusts viewers to form their own opinions. Festival audiences responded particularly well to the movie's willingness to tackle difficult questions. In an era when many stories provide clear heroes and villains, Good Boy embraces ambiguity. It challenges viewers to confront uncomfortable ideas without offering easy solutions. Critics frequently praised the performances. Stephen Graham's work received significant attention for its emotional complexity. Andrea Riseborough was celebrated for bringing depth and humanity to Catherine. Anson Boone earned recognition for carrying much of the film's emotional burden and delivering a transformation that feels believable and earned. Many reviews also highlighted Jan Komasa's direction. The film demonstrates remarkable confidence and control. Every creative decision appears carefully considered. Nothing feels unnecessary. Every scene contributes to character development or thematic exploration. Audiences who expected a straightforward thriller were often surprised by the film's emotional depth. While suspense remains a central element, the story ultimately focuses more on people than plot. The kidnapping serves as a framework for exploring larger questions about morality, responsibility, family, and change. One reason the film resonated with so many viewers is its relevance to contemporary society. Questions about accountability, rehabilitation, and personal responsibility are increasingly important. The film approaches these issues through an intimate human story rather than political debate, making them accessible to a wide audience. As word of mouth spread, discussions surrounding the film expanded beyond traditional reviews. Viewers debated character motivations, interpreted symbolic elements, and argued about the ending. Social media became filled with theories and analysis. Some audiences viewed the story as a critique of modern culture. Others interpreted it as an examination of grief and loss. Many saw it as a cautionary tale about the dangers of obsession. This variety of interpretations reflects the richness of the screenplay. The story operates on multiple levels simultaneously. It can be enjoyed as a suspenseful thriller while also supporting deeper analysis. Few films manage to achieve both goals so effectively. Perhaps the most remarkable accomplishment of Good Boy is its refusal to provide certainty. Even after spending hours with these characters, audiences may still struggle to define them. Are they good people making terrible choices? Are they damaged individuals trying to heal? Are they victims, villains, or something in between? The film suggests that human beings rarely fit neatly into such categories. People are complicated, they make mistakes, they justify actions, they hurt others while trying to help them, they seek redemption while causing harm. These contradictions lie at the heart of Good Boy. They transform what could have been a simple thriller into a thoughtful exploration of human nature. Long after specific plot details fade from memory, the questions raised by the story continue to linger, and it is those lingering questions that ultimately define the film's success. Not the twists, not the suspense, not even the performances. What remains is the uncomfortable realization that under different circumstances, almost anyone can convince themselves they are doing the right thing. That realization is what makes Good Boy truly unsettling. The film is not frightening because of monsters hiding in the dark. It is frightening because it reveals how easily ordinary people can lose themselves in the pursuit of what they believe is good. As audiences continued discussing Good Boy after its release, one thing became increasingly clear: this was not the kind of film that disappeared from people's minds after a single viewing. The story stayed with viewers because it touched on fears and questions that exist far beyond the screen. Everyone has encountered someone they wished would change. Everyone has wondered whether certain people deserve second chances. Everyone has questioned whether punishment actually makes anyone better. Good Boy takes those universal thoughts and pushes them to an extreme. Instead of asking whether someone can change, it asks what happens when another person becomes obsessed with forcing that change. The result is a story that feels both fictional and disturbingly believable. One of the most interesting elements of the film is its exploration of control. Nearly every major character is trying to control something. Tommy wants control over his own freedom and identity. Chris wants control over Tommy's future. Catherine wants control over the emotional pain that has shaped her life. Even minor characters often reveal desires to influence events around them. This shared need for control creates much of the film's conflict. No one is willing to completely surrender their beliefs. No one wants to admit they might be wrong. As a result, conversations become battles and relationships become tests of willpower. The movie repeatedly asks whether true change can ever be forced. Chris believes it can. His entire mission is based on that assumption. He views human behavior almost like a broken machine that can be repaired through discipline, repetition, and structure. Tommy disagrees completely. He believes freedom is essential to personal growth. Any change that occurs through force is not genuine change at all. It is merely obedience. The film never clearly chooses one side over the other. Instead, it presents evidence supporting both perspectives. There are moments when Chris seems to be helping Tommy. There are also moments when his actions appear deeply harmful. This ambiguity keeps audiences engaged because there is no simple answer. Many viewers interpreted Tommy as a symbol of modern youth. He lives impulsively, he seeks excitement, he records everything, he struggles with responsibility and often prioritizes immediate gratification over long term consequences. In this interpretation, Chris represents an older generation frustrated by what it sees as declining values and discipline. Seen through this lens, Good Boy becomes more than a personal story, it becomes a conversation between generations. Both sides criticize each other. Both sides misunderstand each other. Both sides believe they possess the correct answer. The film's brilliance lies in its refusal to portray either side as completely right. The younger generation has flaws. The older generation has flaws. Progress becomes impossible when each side focuses only on the failures of the other. Another powerful theme running throughout the movie is loneliness. Although the story contains several characters, many of them feel emotionally isolated. Tommy hides vulnerability behind aggression. Chris buries uncertainty beneath confidence. Catherine conceals pain behind calmness. This emotional isolation influences every major decision in the story. Characters struggle to communicate honestly. They avoid confronting painful truths. They convince themselves that extreme actions are necessary because they feel disconnected from others. The house itself becomes a symbol of this isolation. It appears comfortable and ordinary from the outside, yet inside it contains secrets, fears, and emotional wounds. In many ways, the building reflects the characters who live within it. Film analysts often point to the basement as one of the movie's most important symbols. On a literal level, it serves as Tommy's prison. On a psychological level, it represents hidden emotions and unresolved trauma. It is the place where uncomfortable truths are buried. Throughout the film, characters are forced to confront aspects of themselves they would rather ignore. Tommy faces the consequences of his actions. Chris confronts the darker side of his mission. Catherine examines the emotional scars she has carried for years. The basement becomes the setting where these confrontations occur. This symbolic use of space adds depth to the narrative. The environment is not merely a backdrop for events, it actively contributes to the story's meaning. Every room reflects a different aspect of the characters' emotional lives. Another reason the film attracted attention was its portrayal of morality. Modern movies often divide characters into heroes and villains. Good Boy rejects that approach entirely. Instead, it presents individuals who are capable of both kindness and cruelty. Chris genuinely cares about Tommy's future, yet he also commits a terrible crime. Tommy can be selfish and destructive, yet he is also capable of growth and self reflection. Catherine demonstrates compassion while participating in morally questionable actions. These contradictions make the characters feel realistic. Real people rarely fit neatly into moral categories. Most individuals possess both strengths and weaknesses. Good Boy embraces this complexity rather than avoiding it. Many critics praise the film for trusting audiences to think independently. The story does not constantly explain its themes. It does not tell viewers what to believe. Instead, it provides information and allows audiences to reach their own conclusions. This approach is increasingly rare in modern filmmaking. Some stories fear ambiguity and rush to provide clear answers. Good Boy understands that uncertainty can be powerful. By leaving certain questions unresolved, the film encourages continued discussion long after the credits end. The ending became one of the most debated aspects of the movie. Different viewers interpreted it in different ways. Some saw hope, others saw tragedy, some focused on personal growth, while others emphasized the consequences of obsession. This variety of interpretations demonstrates the strength of the storytelling. The ending respects audience intelligence. Rather than delivering a simple message, it invites reflection. Online discussions frequently examined whether Tommy truly changes during the course of the story. Some viewers argued that he develops greater self awareness and maturity. Others believed his transformation is more complicated than it initially appears. Similar debates surrounded Chris. Is he a well intentioned man who loses his way, or was his mission flawed from the very beginning? Does genuine concern excuse harmful actions? Can good intentions justify unethical behavior? The film deliberately avoids offering definitive answers. This ambiguity contributes significantly to its lasting impact. Viewers continue revisiting scenes and conversations, searching for new insights and interpretations. Each viewing often reveals details that were overlooked previously. The performances play a major role in supporting this complexity. Stephen Graham avoids portraying Chris as either a hero or a villain. Instead, he creates a fully realized human being whose strengths and weaknesses coexist. Audiences may disagree with Chris's choices while still understanding his emotions. Andrea Riseborough achieves something similar with Catherine. Her character could easily have been overshadowed by the larger conflict between Tommy and Chris. Instead, she becomes an essential part of the story's emotional foundation. Anson Boone's portrayal of Tommy provides the audience with a perspective through which to experience the film's events. His character evolves significantly over the course of the narrative, yet never loses the flaws that make him believable. Together, these performances elevate the material beyond a simple thriller. They transform it into a character study filled with emotional nuance and psychological depths. The film's visual storytelling deserves further recognition as well. Small details often communicate information more effectively than dialogue. A look, a gesture, or a change in posture can reveal emotional developments that characters are unwilling to express verbally. This subtlety rewards attentive viewers. The film trusts audiences to notice details and draw conclusions. Rather than explaining every emotion, it allows performances and visuals to speak for themselves. As time passes, Good Boy may ultimately be remembered less for its plot and more for its ideas. The kidnapping premise initially attracts attention, but the themes are what remain in memory. Questions about rehabilitation, responsibility, freedom, and morality have existed for generations. The film approaches these timeless issues through a contemporary lens, making them feel immediate and relevant. Its exploration of grief is particularly powerful. Many character motivations are rooted in loss. Pain influences decisions, relationships, and beliefs. Characters attempt to cope with suffering in different ways, sometimes constructively and sometimes destructively. The story suggests that unresolved grief can distort judgment. People who are hurting may convince themselves that extreme actions are necessary. They may seek control because they feel powerless. They may become obsessed with fixing others because they cannot fix themselves. This emotional honesty helps explain why the film resonates so strongly with audiences. Beneath the suspense and psychological tension lies a deeply human story about pain, hope, and the search for meaning. The title itself continues to gain significance throughout analysis of the film. Good Boy initially sounds simple, almost innocent. By the end of the story, those words carry enormous weight. They raise questions about obedience, conformity, approval, and identity. Who defines what it means to be good? Can goodness be measured? Is a person still good if their actions cause harm? These questions remain relevant long after the film ends. In many ways, the title serves as the movie's central mystery. Every character possesses a different definition of goodness. Their conflicting interpretations drive much of the narrative. The inability to agree on that definition becomes a source of tension and tragedy. As viewers reflect on the film, they often discover that the story has no easy villains and no perfect heroes. Instead, it presents flawed individuals struggling with difficult choices. Some choices lead to growth, others lead to suffering. Most contain elements of both. This complexity is what elevates Good Boy above many contemporary thrillers. It refuses simplicity. It embraces contradiction. It acknowledges that people are capable of kindness and cruelty, wisdom and foolishness, hope and despair. The film ultimately argues that change is possible, but it cannot be manufactured like a product or imposed like a rule. Genuine transformation requires choice, understanding, and personal responsibility. Any attempt to force it risks becoming something very different from the good intentions that inspired it. By combining psychological suspense with emotional depth, strong performances, intelligent writing, and thought provoking themes, Good Boy established itself as one of the most memorable character driven thrillers of its era. It is a film that entertains, challenges, and unsettles in equal measure. Most importantly, it leaves audiences with questions rather than answers. Those questions continue echoing long after the screen goes dark, ensuring that the film remains alive in conversation, interpretation, and memory. And perhaps that is the greatest achievement any movie can hope for, not simply to be watched, but to be thought about, argued over, and remembered long after the final scene has ended. As discussions around Good Boy continued to grow, one thing became more and more obvious. The film had managed to tap into something uncomfortable and universal at the same time. It wasn't just about a kidnapping or a psychological experiment. It was about human nature itself, specifically the part of human nature that believes it can fix others if it tries hard enough. That idea became the center of many audience debates. Some viewers saw Chris as a tragic figure, someone who genuinely believed he was saving a life but went too far and crossed moral boundaries. Others saw him as dangerous from the very beginning, a man whose need for control disguised itself as compassion. Tommy, meanwhile, split audiences in the opposite direction. Some saw him as a victim of circumstance shaped by neglect and bad influences. Others saw him as someone who had long crossed the line into cruelty and deserved consequences. This division was not accidental. It came directly from how the film was written and performed. Every major character was designed to feel partially right and partially wrong. That balance is what keeps the story alive in the viewer's mind. There is no single perspective that fully explains everything that happens. Another major talking point became the emotional transformation of Tommy. The film never presents his change as sudden or magical. Instead, it shows a slow process of resistance, frustration, reflection, and occasional vulnerability. At times, Tommy appears completely unchanged, still angry and defiant. At other moments, cracks appear in his behavior, suggesting that his environment is forcing him to confront parts of himself he has never dealt with before. The audience is never fully sure whether this change is genuine or simply survival instinct. That uncertainty is intentional. It reflects one of the film's core ideas that human behavior under pressure is difficult to interpret and even harder to trust. Chris's transformation is even more complex. At the beginning, he appears confident in his mission. He believes structure, discipline, and emotional confrontation will reshape Tommy into a better person. But as time passes, that confidence begins to erode. Small moments of doubt creep in. He starts reacting emotionally instead of logically. His belief system becomes harder to maintain under the weight of reality. What makes Chris especially interesting is that he never fully abandons his mission. Even when he begins to question himself, he still holds on to the belief that what he is doing has meaning. That persistence creates a disturbing tension. The more uncertain he becomes, the more unpredictable his actions grow. Catherine's role in this psychological triangle adds another layer of complexity. She is not simply an observer, she is deeply involved emotionally, even when she appears quiet or distant. Her behavior suggests a long history of internal conflict, as if she has been carrying emotional weight long before Tommy ever entered their lives. Some viewers interpret Catherine as the emotional balance between Tommy and Chris. Others see her as someone slowly breaking under pressure. Either way, Her presence prevents the story from becoming a simple two person conflict. She reflects the long term consequences of decisions that were never fully resolved in the past. As the film progresses toward its final stretch, the emotional intensity shifts. Early tension built around fear and confusion slowly transforms into something more psychological. Instead of asking what will happen next, the audience begins asking why is this happening at all? And what do these people really believe? This shift is one of the film's most effective storytelling techniques. It changes the viewing experience from passive suspense to active interpretation. The audience is no longer just watching events unfold, they are trying to decode them. The final act of Good Boy has been widely discussed because it refuses to offer a clean emotional resolution. Instead of tying everything together neatly, it leaves space for interpretation. Some characters appear to reach a form of understanding, but that understanding is not clearly defined or universally accepted. What remains consistent, however, is the emotional cost of everything that has happened. No matter how viewers interpret the outcome, the story leaves behind a sense of consequence. Actions cannot be undone, words cannot be taken back, relationships are permanently altered. This lingering emotional weight is one of the reasons the film stands out among psychological thrillers. It does not rely on shock value alone. Instead, it builds meaning through accumulation, through conversations, silences, decisions, and regrets that build up over time. After release, audiences also began focusing on the film's subtle symbolism. One of the most discussed elements is the idea of training versus becoming. Chris believes behavior can be trained, shaped, and corrected like a system. Tommy represents the opposite idea that identity is not something that can simply be rewritten by force. This conflict reflects a broader philosophical debate about human nature. Are people products of their environment, or are they capable of choosing who they become regardless of circumstances? The film never settles this argument. Instead, it allows both ideas to coexist in tension. Another recurring symbol in the film is silence. Moments where no one speaks often carry more emotional weight than dialogue heavy scenes. Silence becomes a space where power shifts, emotions surface, and uncomfortable truths linger without resolution. In many ways, silence is treated as its own character in the story. The sound design reinforces this effect. Small, everyday noises become amplified in moments of tension. A chair moving, a door closing, or footsteps in another room can suddenly feel threatening depending on the emotional context of the scene. This careful attention to sound helps maintain a constant undercurrent of unease. The performances continue to be a major reason why the film remains so impactful. Stephen Graham's portrayal of Chris avoids turning him into a symbolic figure. Instead, he feels grounded, almost ordinary in some moments. That ordinariness is what makes him unsettling. He does not behave like a traditional antagonist. He behaves like a person who believes he is doing something justified. Andrea Riseborough's performance as Catherine adds emotional texture that deepens the entire narrative. She often reacts in subtle ways rather than dramatic ones. A pause before speaking or a quiet expression of discomfort can communicate more than dialogue. Her character becomes a reminder that not all suffering is loud. Anson Boone's portrayal of Tommy completes the emotional structure of the film. He begins as a character defined by resistance and anger, but gradually becomes someone the audience understands on a deeper level. Even when his actions remain questionable, his emotional reality becomes harder to ignore. This layered character work is what gives the film its staying power. Long after the plot details fade, the emotional dynamics remain clear in memory. Viewers often find themselves recalling specific conversations rather than major events. That is a sign of a film driven by character rather than spectacle. As more time passes since its release, Good Boy has started to gain a reputation as a modern psychological study rather than just a thriller. It is being discussed not only in terms of entertainment but also in terms of its ideas about morality, identity, and emotional damage. Some viewers describe it as uncomfortable but necessary viewing. Others find it emotionally exhausting but deeply meaningful. Very few people describe it as forgettable. The film's impact comes from its refusal to provide comfort. In the end, what makes Good Boy so powerful is not its premise, its twist, or its structure. It is the way it forces audiences to sit with uncertainty. It asks difficult questions and refuses to answer them in simple ways. Can a person truly change if they are forced to? Is it possible to help someone without controlling them? And perhaps the most uncomfortable question of all, how far would someone go if they truly believed they were doing the right thing? The film does not resolve these questions. It leaves them open, echoing in the mind long after the final scene fades. That lingering uncertainty is what transforms Good Boy from a thriller into something closer to a psychological experience. It is not just a story to be watched, it is a story to be questioned, argued, and remembered. And in that sense, its success is not measured in clarity, but in how deeply it continues to unsettle the viewer long after everything has ended. Even after all the major themes, performances, and psychological layers are discussed, Good Boy still leaves behind something harder to define, an emotional residue that sticks with viewers in a very personal way. It is not the kind of film that ends when the screen fades to black. Instead, it continues quietly in the mind, replaying conversations, expressions, and choices as if the story refuses to settle into a single meaning. This lingering effect is largely because the film avoids providing emotional closure. Most stories guide audiences toward a conclusion where everything is explained or resolved. Good Boy does the opposite. It gives enough information to understand the characters but not enough to fully judge them. That gap between understanding and judgment is where the film lives emotionally. One of the final impressions the movie leaves is the idea that goodness itself is unstable. Every character in the story believes at some point that they are doing the right thing. Chris believes he is correcting a broken life. Catherine believes she is protecting something fragile. Tommy believes he is surviving in a world that has already failed him. Yet every one of those beliefs leads to consequences that are painful, complicated, and irreversible. This is where the title becomes most powerful. Good Boy stops being a simple phrase and starts becoming a question. What does it actually mean to be good? Is it obedience? Is it kindness? Is it change? Or is it something that cannot be defined at all without becoming dangerous? The film suggests that the moment someone tries to enforce goodness onto another person, the idea itself begins to break. Goodness stops being a personal choice and becomes a system of control. And once control enters the equation, morality becomes blurred. This moral instability is reflected in the film's final emotional tone. There is no triumphant victory. There is no complete downfall. Instead, there is a sense of unresolved tension, as if the story has paused rather than ended. Characters are left carrying the consequences of their actions without clear redemption or punishment. That ambiguity is exactly why the film continues to be discussed long after its release. People are not arguing about what happened, they are arguing about what it means. Some viewers focus on Tommy's transformation and see it as a warning about unchecked behavior. Others focus on Chris and see a cautionary tale about obsessive morality. Some focus on Catherine and interpret her as the emotional cost of unresolved grief. All interpretations feel valid in their own way, which is what makes the film so effective. It does not force a single truth, it presents multiple emotional realities and lets them exist side by side even when they contradict each other. Another important layer of the film is how it portrays time. The passage of time inside the story is not just chronological, it is emotional. Early scenes feel sharp, immediate, and reactive. As time progresses, everything becomes heavier. Conversations slow down, reactions become more complicated, even silence feels longer. This shift in rhythm mirrors the psychological changes happening within the characters. Tommy's initial resistance gradually turns into something more internal and reflective. Chris's certainty slowly erodes into doubt and frustration. Catherine's emotional distance begins to crack under pressure. By the time the story reaches its final moments, all three characters feel fundamentally changed, but not in ways that can easily be labeled as success or failure. They are altered by experience, not transformed into simplified versions of themselves. The film's refusal to offer a clean moral outcome is one of the reasons it resonates so strongly. Audiences are often conditioned to expect resolution, good rewarded, bad punished, conflict resolved. Good Boy removes that expectation entirely. Instead, it presents consequences without comfort. Even the visual memory of the film contributes to this feeling. The house, the basement, and the confined spaces remain in the viewer's mind as emotional symbols rather than physical locations. The house represents control, the basement represents suppressed truth. The characters represent conflicting ideas about responsibility and identity. These symbolic elements work together quietly, without drawing attention to themselves. The film never announces its meaning. It lets meaning emerge slowly through repetition and emotional build-up. Sound also continues to play a role in how the film is remembered. The absence of constant music in key scenes creates a kind of emotional silence that lingers after viewing. Viewers often recall not what they heard, but what they didn't hear, moments where silence felt heavier than dialogue. This restraint in sound design is part of what gives the film its realism. Real emotional conflict rarely has background music. It happens in quiet rooms, in awkward pauses, in unfinished sentences. Good Boy captures that truth with unusual precision. As a result, the film feels less like a traditional thriller and more like an observation of human behavior under pressure. It is not trying to entertain in a conventional sense. It is trying to expose how fragile belief systems can become when confronted with real consequences. This is especially evident in how each character justifies their actions. Chris frames his choices as necessary intervention. Catherine frames hers as emotional survival. Tommy frames his as self defense against a world that misunderstands him. None of these justifications are entirely false, but none of them are entirely sufficient either. The film does not resolve which justification is correct. Instead, it shows how people construct meaning around their actions in order to survive emotionally. This psychological realism is one of the strongest aspects of the writing. In many ways, Good Boy can also be seen as a story about failure. Failure of communication, failure of systems, and failure of personal understanding. Each character fails to fully understand the others. Each belief system collapses when tested against reality. Yet within that failure, there are moments of genuine connection. Those moments are brief but important. A shared look, a pause before anger, a moment of hesitation. These fragments suggest that understanding is possible even if it never fully arrives. That tension between connection and disconnection is what gives the film its emotional depth. It does not present people as fully isolated or fully united. Instead, it shows them constantly moving between both states. By the time viewers finish reflecting on the story, they often realize that the film is not really about kidnapping at all. It is about influence, how people influence each other, how beliefs are transferred, challenged, and distorted, how love, fear, and control can all look similar depending on perspective. This is why Good Boy continues to generate discussion. It does not end with clarity, it ends with questions that feel personal rather than theoretical. It asks viewers not just what they think of the characters but what they believe about human nature itself, and that is where its impact becomes lasting. It does not simply tell a story, it places the audience inside a moral and emotional conflict that cannot be easily resolved. Long after the final scene fades, what remains is not the plot but the feeling, a quiet discomfort, a sense of uncertainty, and the realization that the line between helping someone and controlling them is far thinner than most people would like to admit. In the end, Good Boy succeeds because it refuses to be simple, it refuses to comfort, it refuses to conclude neatly. Instead, it leaves behind something far more powerful, a lingering question about what it truly means to change, to care, and to be good in a world where those ideas are never as clear as they seem. Good Boy, also known by its alternative title Heel, is a 2025 black comedy thriller film directed by the acclaimed Polish filmmaker Jan Komasa. The film stars Stephen Graham, Andrea Riseborough, Anson Boone, and Ked Rakusen, and tells a deeply provocative, unsettling, and ultimately ambiguous story about crime, punishment, rehabilitation, and the disturbing extremes to which certain people will go in the name of doing what they believe to be good. The film had its world premiere on the 5th September 2025 in the centerpiece section of the 50th Toronto International Film Festival, where it generated considerable buzz and sparked wide-ranging critical conversation about its themes, its performances, and its deliberately unresolved moral framework. Running at 110 minutes, co-produced by Poland and the United Kingdom and spoken entirely in English, Good Boy represents a significant milestone in Komasa's career as his first English language film, marking his confident transition from the Polish art house scene to a broader international stage. To fully appreciate Good Boy, it is essential to understand who Jan Komasa is and what he brings to the material. Komasa is a Polish director who gained major international recognition with his 2019 film Corpus Christi, a searing moral drama about a young man who impersonates a priest in a small Polish village after being released from a juvenile detention facility. Corpus Christi was nominated for the Academy Award for Best International Feature Film, catapulting Komasa into the global spotlight and establishing him as one of the most compelling voices in contemporary European cinema. His films tend to grapple with questions of identity, guilt, redemption, and the social systems that shape and distort human beings. Good Boy continues that thematic lineage but does so through a distinctly different tonal register, one that is darker, stranger, and far more willing to lean into black comedy and outright absurdism. The screenplay for Good Boy was written by Bartek Bartosik and Nakash Khalid. The story originated in a script that was originally written in Polish and set in Warsaw. However, in order to appeal to a broader international audience, the decision was made to adapt it into English and relocate the setting to Yorkshire, England. This geographical transplant turns out to be more than merely logistical. Yorkshire's sweeping rural landscapes, its grand countryside houses, and its particular cultural identity give the film a very specific texture that would have been quite different had it remained in an urban Polish setting. The wide open spaces and the peculiar insularity of English rural life contribute to the film's atmosphere of claustrophobia, control, and quiet menace in ways that serve the story extremely well. The film is produced by three figures of significant note: Jeremy Thomas, Ewa Piaskowska, and the legendary Polish director Jerzy Skolimowski. Skolimowski, himself a filmmaker of enormous international stature, known for films such as Deep End, Moonlighting, and the Oscar nominated EO, is credited as both producer and the individual who brought the project to Komasa in the first place. According to accounts from the production, Skolimowski approached Komasa with the screenplay while Komasa was still actively promoting Corpus Christi. The timing proved fortuitous, as Komasa was evidently looking for material that would allow him to challenge himself in a new language and a new cultural environment, while still engaging with the kinds of thorny moral and social questions that have always defined his work. Jeremy Thomas, the veteran British producer behind such landmark films as The Last Emperor, Naked Lunch, and Crash, brings his characteristic taste for challenging, uncompromising cinema to the project, lending it both credibility and the kind of resources that allow the filmmaking to be executed at a high level. The cinematography was handled by Michal Dimek, a frequent Komasa collaborator whose visual sensibility blends naturalism with a quietly unsettling formalism that suits the material perfectly. The film was edited by Agnieszka Glinska and the score was composed by Abel Korzeniowski, a Polish-born composer known for his lush, often darkly romantic orchestral work. Principal photography took place across Yorkshire and Warsaw and was completed in October 2024. The Yorkshire locations provide the film with its central visual identity. The large, isolated countryside home where most of the film's action takes place feels simultaneously grand and oppressive, a space that has been designed with obsessive precision to project a certain idea of civilized, aspirational domesticity, even as the basement beneath it contains something deeply sinister. The contrast between the manicured surfaces of the house and its horrifying secret is one of the film's most potent visual conceits, and Dimex's camera consistently finds ways to make the ordinary feel threatening without resorting to cheap horror film tricks. The story begins by introducing Tommy, a 19-year-old young man whose behavior is comprehensively antisocial. He is foul-mouthed, drug-abusing, prone to gratuitous violence, and takes evident pleasure in recording his worst acts and uploading them online for an audience. He represents a certain archetype of contemporary social dysfunction, a young man adrift, unmoored from any positive social structure, finding identity and status through transgression and the performance of cruelty. Tommy is the kind of person that polite society finds easy to dismiss, condemn, or simply ignore. He belongs to a cultural underclass that mainstream discourse often talks about but rarely takes seriously as a subject of genuine moral inquiry. The film takes him very seriously indeed. Into Tommy's chaotic life comes something entirely unexpected and deeply disturbing. He is abducted. He wakes up chained in the basement of a large, comfortable countryside house owned by a man named Chris and his wife Catherine. Chris is not a simple villain, which is one of the film's most disquieting achievements. He is articulate, educated, apparently decent, and genuinely convinced that he is doing something beneficial. He forces Tommy to watch educational films, including films starring Chris and his own family, as well as footage of Tommy's own bad behavior that has been uploaded online. The stated intention is rehabilitation. Chris wants to make Tommy a better person. He speaks to Tommy with a kind of patient, measured benevolence that is, in its way, far more chilling than open cruelty would be because it refuses to acknowledge the fundamental horror of what is being done. Chris is imprisoning and brutalizing a young man while sincerely believing he is helping him. And this gap between self perception and reality is the moral abyss at the heart of the film. Chris's methods are worth dwelling on at some length because they illuminate both the film's satirical targets and its genuine moral complexity. He lectures Tommy, he shows him films, he models what he considers to be appropriate behavior. He celebrates Tommy's birthday with a picnic. He eventually moves Tommy out of the basement and into an upstairs room, attaching his chain to a ceiling mounted track system that allows him to move throughout the house, while simultaneously installing combination locks throughout the track to control where Tommy can go. The combination of apparent freedom with its actual structural limitation is a perfect metaphor for the film's broader concerns about the nature of rehabilitation, social conditioning, and what it means to truly help someone as opposed to merely reshaping them to conform to one's own image of acceptable humanity. Chris wants Tommy to become good in the way that Chris has decided goodness looks. The question of whether Tommy's eventual transformation is genuine or is merely adaptive behavior developed in response to captivity is one the film deliberately refuses to resolve. Catherine, Chris's wife, is introduced as a more passive figure, reclusive, withdrawn, seemingly complicit in her husband's project without being its driving force. But over time, she develops her own relationship with Tommy, bringing him books to read and gradually including him in the family's domestic life in small but significant ways. She is a character who requires careful interpretation because her motivations are never made fully explicit. Is she genuinely committed to her husband's project, or is she a captive of sorts herself, trapped within a marriage and a way of life that has made this horrifying experiment feel normal? The film is interested in these questions without providing easy answers. What is clear is that Catherine becomes genuinely attached to Tommy over time, and that her feelings for him introduce a note of genuine warmth into the film's otherwise frigid emotional landscape. Jonathan, the family's 10-year-old son, is another crucial figure in the story. Children in films like this often function as moral barometers. Their innocence either exposes the corruption of the adults around them or is threatened by it. Jonathan's developing friendship with Tommy is one of the film's most emotionally complex threads. Tommy, for all his behavioral problems, is capable of genuine warmth and connection, and his relationship with Jonathan reveals dimensions of his character that his public persona conceals entirely. Jonathan, in turn, brings out something in Tommy that the rest of his life has suppressed, something gentle, protective, and perhaps capable of growth. But the film never allows this warmth to become sentimental. Jonathan exists within a household that is built on coercion and violence, and his participation in Tommy's captivity, however innocent, implicates him in something deeply troubling. The character of Rena introduces a different perspective into the film's moral world. She arrives at the house having responded to a job advertisement for a housekeeper, meeting Chris and signing a non-disclosure agreement before being shown around the property. When she discovers Tommy chained in the cellar, her instinct is to flee, and this instinct represents the film's normative moral register, the response that any reasonable person would have to discovering that their employer has abducted and imprisoned a young man. But Chris prevents her from leaving by revealing that he is aware of her past and her precarious visa situation and threatening to contact his connection in the home office. Rena is thus coerced into complicity just as Tommy is coerced into captivity. Her position in the film is fascinating precisely because she is not evil. She is trapped, financially and legally vulnerable, and in a situation that exploits every one of her weaknesses. She becomes a kind of moral conscience for the audience, the character through whose eyes we can most directly observe the wrongness of what is happening. even as her own choices and constraints prevent her from acting on that knowledge. The relationship between Rena and Tommy evolves over the course of the film in ways that are subtle and carefully observed. They are both, in different ways, prisoners of Chris's project, one literally, one figuratively. Tommy appeals to Rena for help when she works in the cellar, and while she cannot initially provide it, a kind of solidarity develops between them. When men come to the house seeking Rena, men who represent the dangers of her own past, Tommy physically fights to protect her and the household, getting overpowered in the process. This moment is significant because it demonstrates that Tommy's attachment to his captors and to Rena has become genuine enough that he acts in their defense even at considerable personal cost. Chris's response to this, thanking Tommy for protecting their family, is one of the film's most disturbing moments because it reveals how completely Chris has failed to examine the nature of what he has created. The climax of Tommy's captivity comes when Rena whispers the code to the combination locks in his ear before leaving with the men who have come for her. Armed with this information, Tommy waits until night time, opens the locks, pries his chain free with a hidden knife, and confronts Chris, who comes downstairs with a handgun. Tommy disarms him, Catherine arrives, and Tommy, in the film's most emotionally charged moment, declares that he will never become the person who used to occupy his room. A crucial piece of information that has been planted earlier in the film, confirming that Tommy is not the first person to have been subjected to Chris's methods. He demands to go free, and Catherine, heartbroken, agrees to let him leave. This ending would be a complicated but satisfying resolution if the film stopped there, but it does not. The final sequence is what transforms Good Boy from a tense, morally complex thriller into something genuinely haunting and deeply unsettling. Having returned home, Tommy does not report his abduction to the police. When asked, he claims simply that he went away with his friend Jonathan. He encounters a young woman named Gabby in a nightclub, heavily intoxicated. She confesses to him that she wishes she could disappear. Tommy asks if she trusts him. When she says yes, he incapacitates her with chloroform and carries her to the gate of Chris's home, rings the buzzer, and waits. The gate opens and Tommy walks toward the house with Gabby in his arms. This ending is the film's most radical act and it demands careful consideration. What it suggests is that the rehabilitation project has worked, but not in the way Chris intended, or perhaps in exactly the way Chris intended, or perhaps in a way that exposes the fundamental violence embedded in the project from the beginning. Tommy has internalized the logic of the house. He has decided that Gabby, like him, needs saving and that the method of saving her is the same method that was applied to him. He has become Chris. He has adopted the role of the benevolent abductor, the civilizing captor, the person who knows better than others what they need and is willing to use any means necessary to deliver it. The film's ending transforms it from a story about the horror of one man's methods into a story about the reproduction of those methods across generations, about how patterns of coercion and control perpetuate themselves even through the people who have suffered most from them. Whether this is a critique of rehabilitation discourse, a comment on the cyclical nature of trauma, a meditation on the limits of empathy, or simply a dark punchline that refuses to moralize, is something the film leaves entirely open. This openness is both its greatest strength and, for some viewers and critics, its most frustrating quality. The film offers no external judgment, no authorial voice that steps in to condemn what Tommy does or to explain what it means. It simply shows the gate opening and lets the implications riverbend outward into silence. The casting of Good Boy is one of its most powerful assets, and it is worth examining in some detail. Stephen Graham, who plays Chris, is one of the most celebrated actors working in British film and television today. His performance in the Netflix series Adolescence, which is referenced in some promotional materials for Good Boy, demonstrated his extraordinary range and his ability to inhabit morally complex, emotionally layered characters with complete conviction. His Chris is a masterclass in quiet menace dressed as kindness. Graham makes Chris genuinely believable as a person who has convinced himself that he is acting from love and a sense of social responsibility, even as his actions are monstrous. There is no twirling mustache villainy here. Chris smiles, speaks softly, cooks meals, and organizes birthday picnics, and the horror comes entirely from the gap between his manner and his methods. Graham finds the character's self righteousness without ever tipping into caricature, and the result is deeply disturbing precisely because Chris feels real. Andrea Riseborough, who plays Catherine, brings her characteristic intensity and interior complexity to a role that is deliberately underwritten in certain respects. Riseborough is an actor who communicates volumes through what she does not say, and Catherine is fundamentally a character of omissions, of things left unexpressed, motivations left unexplained, feelings left unacknowledged. Her Catherine is not a monster, but she is complicit, and Riseborough does the difficult work of making her complicity feel human and comprehensible without excusing it. The gradual warming of Catherine's relationship with Tommy is rendered with great delicacy, and the final scene, in which she agrees, heartbroken, to let him go, is one of the film's most emotionally resonant moments, carrying the weight of everything that has passed between them. Onsen Boone, who plays Tommy, has the film's most demanding role, and he delivers a performance of remarkable range and authenticity. Tommy begins as the kind of character audiences are accustomed to writing off: coarse, aggressive, apparently without redeeming qualities. Boone makes him recognizable as a human being from the first scene, finding the pain and the need beneath the aggression without softening it or sentimentalizing it. The arc he must trace across the film's 110 minutes is enormous, from feral captive to tentative family member to something far more complex and troubling, and he executes it with a precision and an emotional intelligence that marks him as a significant talent. His relationship with Jonathan, played by Kit Rakusen, is one of the film's great pleasures, rendered with warmth and naturalness and a sense of genuine mutual affection that makes the film's ending all the more ambiguous. Monica Frachik as Rena contributes a vital grounding presence to the film. In a story full of extreme behavior and moral abstraction, Rena's reactions, her horror, her helplessness, her eventual complicated solidarity provide the audience with its most direct emotional access point. Savannah Stein as Gabby has relatively limited screen time but makes the most of it, and her final scene with Tommy is devastating in its implications. The production aspects of Good Boy deserve acknowledgement alongside its narrative and performative dimensions. Michael Dymek's cinematography is consistently excellent, using the Yorkshire countryside and the interior spaces of the house to create a visual language that is simultaneously beautiful and oppressive. The house itself, large, tastefully decorated, full of the signifiers of educated, liberal minded prosperity, is shot in a way that makes its surfaces feel both attractive and suffocating. The basement, by contrast, is lit in a way that emphasizes its fundamental degradation. As Tommy moves upward through the house, the visual grammar changes subtly, tracking his apparent rehabilitation while keeping the viewer alert to what is being lost, even as it seems to be gained. Abel Korzeniowski's score is characteristically sophisticated, using orchestral music in ways that undercut rather than confirm the emotional register of particular scenes, adding a kind of terrible beauty to moments that should be ugly, and introducing discordance into moments that seem warm or comfortable. The film's premiere at the 50th Toronto International Film Festival was a significant event. Toronto is one of the world's most important film festivals, and the centerpiece section in which Good Boy screened is reserved for films of particular ambition and distinction. The response at Toronto was encouraging, with critics noting both the film's distinctive tonal control and the exceptional quality of its performances. Following Toronto, Good Boy also screened at the BFI London Film Festival and the 20th Rome Film Festival, further establishing its credentials as a major international art house release. A promotional clip was released on the 30th September 2025, 2 days before the Toronto premiere, generating considerable online discussion and establishing the film's premise in the public imagination. The distribution of Good Boy has been notably broad, reflecting confidence in the film's international appeal. In November 2025, it was acquired for distribution by Magnolia Pictures in the United States and Signature Entertainment in the United Kingdom and Ireland, with the UK release date set for 20 March 2026. Ex Verlai acquired it for Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. Minerva Pictures for Italy, U-Planet Caramel Films for Spain, Sunday for Japan, 18K Films for the Benelux countries, Front Row Films for the Middle East, Pris Audio Visuals for Portugal, Shaw Organization for Singapore, Beta Film for Bulgaria, the Film Group for Greece, Catchplay for Taiwan, and Beer Film for Turkey. In Poland, the film's country of co-production, it will be released by Kinoświat. This wide distribution footprint speaks to the film's genuine international reach and the confidence of its various distributors in its potential to connect with audiences across different cultural contexts. The critical reception of Good Boy has been generally strong, though with some notable reservations. On Rotten Tomatoes, 87% of 62 critics' reviews are positive, placing the film firmly in the certified fresh category and indicating broad critical enthusiasm. The website's consensus describes it as a film that wrestles with provocative questions about rehabilitation while having what it calls a maniacally fun time doing so, characterizing it as a nutty thriller with a surprising amount of method to its madness. This formulation captures something important about the film's tone. It is not a straightforwardly serious drama, but rather a work that uses genre mechanics and dark humor to approach deeply serious questions in ways that are both entertaining and genuinely unsettling. On Metacritic, the film earned a score of 63 out of 100 based on 17 critics, indicating generally favorable reviews, though the lower score relative to Rotten Tomatoes suggests that some critics had significant reservations alongside their overall positive assessments. Among the individual critical responses, Damon Weiss of Deadline offered a notably perceptive review, comparing the film's sensibility to the early work of Greek director Yorgos Lanthimos. This is an illuminating comparison. Lanthimos is best known internationally for films like Dogtooth, The Lobster, and The Favourite, all of which are characterized by a rigidly stylized approach to human behavior, an interest in systems of social control and coercion, and a dark humor that emerges from the gap between the extreme nature of the scenarios depicted and the deadpan register in which they are presented. The comparison to early Lanthimos, specifically Wise notes, the way the strangeness of the premise does a lot of heavy lifting, suggests that Good Boy operates in similar territory, using a bizarre but internally consistent premise to illuminate something real about power, control, and the human capacity for self-deception. Wise goes on to praise the performances, noting that Graham and his fellow cast members bring genuine character to what might easily have been a one-note film. Christopher Llewellyn-Reed of Film Festival Today wrote that the film pleasantly surprises in the way it spins out its story threads, and that there is more to Tommy than we originally encounter, and more to the movie too, even if some of it strains credulity. This last qualification is worth considering. Good Boy is on its face a highly implausible scenario. The idea that a couple could abduct a young criminal and chain him in their basement without legal consequence, that they could sustain this situation for an extended period, that their methods would work in the way the film depicts. All of this requires a considerable degree of willing suspension of disbelief, but this is arguably intentional. Good Boy is not trying to be a realistic social drama. It is operating in the mode of fable, using an exaggerated scenario to foreground questions that realistic social drama might obscure. The implausibility is part of the point. The film is asking, what if we could do this? What if it worked? Would that make it right? And its answer, embodied in the final sequence, is that even if it worked, the working would itself be a kind of horror. Pavel Snapko of Showbiz by PS offered a more ambivalent assessment, describing the film as an insanely interesting story with a rather sad ending, praising its setup and performances while arguing that the finale discards everything that was carefully built in the first half. This critique is worth taking seriously because it points to a genuine tension in the film's construction. The first half is, in many respects, a more straightforward moral thriller, one with a clear victim, a clear perpetrator, and a clear set of ethical questions. The second half becomes stranger, more morally compromised, and ultimately more ambiguous in ways that can feel destabilizing if one is invested in a more conventional narrative resolution. The debate about whether this structural choice is a strength or a weakness is one that will likely continue among viewers and critics for some time, and it speaks to the film's genuine ambition and its refusal to be easily categorized. Good Boy belongs to a broader tradition of films that use scenarios of confinement and control to explore questions of socialization, rehabilitation, and the nature of the self. It invites comparison with films like Michael Haneke's The Seventh Continent, which examines the violence embedded in bourgeois domestic life, with Dogtooth, which depicts a family that has constructed an entirely private world of meaning to insulate its children from external reality, and with Room, which explores the psychological consequences of long term captivity and the difficulty of reintegration afterward. But Good Boy has its own distinctive logic and its own particular concerns. Unlike the Lanthimos comparison suggests, it is not primarily interested in the absurdity of social convention for its own sake. It is interested in the specific question of rehabilitation, in who gets to decide that someone needs to be rehabilitated, what methods are acceptable in the service of that goal, and what the relationship is between genuine transformation and behavioral compliance. These are questions with obvious relevance to real world debates about criminal justice, incarceration, and social policy. The United Kingdom, where the film is set, has a long and troubled history of debates about the purposes of imprisonment, whether it is primarily punitive or rehabilitative, whether it succeeds in either aim, and what alternatives might look like. Chris's project in the film is, in a certain sense, a privatized and radically accelerated version of what the prison system claims to do. Take someone who has behaved badly, remove them from the general population, expose them to different influences and expectations, and return them transformed. The film's satire of this project, if that is indeed what it is, lies in the way it exposes the coercion and the self interest that underlie even the most apparently benevolent forms of social intervention. Chris is not simply a madman acting alone. He represents, in concentrated and extreme form, something that is present in many of the ways that societies attempt to manage and reform their most troubled members. At the same time, the film does not simply condemn all rehabilitation efforts as necessarily coercive or corrupting. Tommy's transformation is real, not merely superficial. He does change over the course of the film. He becomes calmer, more reflective, more capable of genuine connection. The relationships he builds within the house, with Jonathan, with Rena, even with Catherine, and in some paradoxical way with Chris, are authentic. The question is not whether change is possible, but what is lost or distorted in the process of achieving it, and who bears the cost of that loss. Tommy's adoption of Chris's logic at the film's conclusion is not presented as a triumphant outcome. It is presented as something sad and troubling, as evidence that the deepest lesson Tommy has learned is not kindness or connection, but the method by which kindness and connection can be imposed. The film's title operates on multiple levels. Good Boy is on its surface what Chris wants Tommy to become: obedient, socialized, grateful, well behaved. It is the kind of phrase one uses to praise a pet, and this dimension of the title is clearly intentional. Tommy is being trained, not educated. The goal of Chris's project is compliance dressed as character development, but the title also carries irony in the film's final movement. Tommy, having been made into a good boy by Chris's methods, immediately turns around and applies those methods to someone else in what he clearly believes is a good and helpful act. He has been good, he has learned, he is applying what he has learned. The horror lies in what he has actually been taught. Jan Komasa's achievement with Good Boy is significant for a number of reasons beyond its thematic ambitions. As his first English language film, it demonstrates that his distinctive directorial sensibility, his interest in moral complexity, his refusal of easy solution, his ability to create films that are simultaneously entertaining and genuinely challenging is not dependent on a specific cultural or linguistic context. The film is unmistakably the work of the same director who made Corpus Christi, even though it occupies a very different generic register. The commitment to exploring the contradictions between people's self perception and the actual moral character of their actions is consistent across both films. In Corpus Christi, a young man who has been genuinely transformed by faith must navigate the gap between his sincere spiritual life and the institutional corruption of the church. In Good Boy, a man who sincerely believes himself to be an agent of positive social change becomes a monster precisely through the exercise of that belief. In both cases, Kumase is interested in the way that sincere conviction can lead to or fail to prevent profound moral failure. The film's box office performance, having earned approximately $1.185 million as of available data, reflects the commercial realities of ambitious art house cinema in the current marketplace. This is the kind of film that earns its reputation through critical attention, festival exposure, and word of mouth rather than through mass commercial appeal. The wide international distribution it has secured suggests that distributors believe it has the potential to find the audiences it deserves in multiple territories, and the strong Rotten Tomatoes score will help it reach viewers who might otherwise not have encountered it. Good Boy is a film that rewards careful attention and tolerates ambiguity without becoming deliberately obscure. It has enough genre energy to keep viewers engaged at the level of plot and performance, while operating simultaneously at a level of moral and thematic complexity that gives it genuine intellectual substance. The performances are uniformly excellent, with Graham and Boone in particular doing career defining work. The direction is assured and purposeful, never calling attention to itself but consistently finding ways to make the film's formal choices serve its thematic concerns. The screenplay is intelligent and disciplined, planting information carefully and using the film's considerable tonal range from genuine comedy to genuine horror, sometimes within the same scene, with considerable skill. What lingers after the film is finished is not any single scene or performance, but rather the question it poses and declines to answer. What does it mean to make someone good? What is the relationship between external transformation and internal change? What do we owe to the people we have decided need saving, and what do we owe to ourselves when we take on that role? These are old questions, but Good Boy asks them in a new way and with a freshness and a darkness that makes them feel genuinely urgent. In a cultural moment when debates about criminal justice reform, restorative justice, and the purposes of incarceration are more prominent than ever, a film that explores these questions through the lens of black comedy and psychological thriller feels both timely and necessary. The film also participates in a broader conversation about social media, performance, and identity that is very much of our current moment. Tommy's habit of recording his worst behavior and uploading it online is not simply a character quirk. It is a commentary on a particular mode of contemporary identity construction in which the performance of transgression becomes a form of self branding and in which notoriety functions as a substitute for more conventional forms of social recognition and status. Chris's use of Tommy's own uploaded videos as part of his rehabilitation curriculum, forcing Tommy to watch himself from the outside, is a clever inversion of this dynamic. The question it raises is whether self-perception can be changed by forcing someone to see themselves as others see them, and whether such change, if achieved, constitutes genuine moral growth or simply the internalization of external judgment. These questions are not merely abstract. They connect directly to contemporary debates about accountability, shame, and the role of public exposure in shaping behavior. There is also something to be said about the film's treatment of class. Chris and Catherine are clearly educated, affluent, comfortable people, people who live in a large countryside house and have the resources and the leisure to pursue their strange project of reformation. Tommy is working class, poorly educated, economically precarious. The film is acutely aware of these dynamics and of the way class shapes who gets to decide that someone else needs to be improved and who becomes the object of that improvement project. This dimension of the film's critique is never made explicit, but it is woven through every scene. The combination of Chris's material privilege and his sense of moral authority is inseparable. His belief that he knows better than Tommy what Tommy needs to become is underwritten at every level by the social advantages that give Chris the power to act on that belief. This is not simply a film about one eccentric couple's bizarre project. It is a film about the structures of power and privilege that make such projects possible and that shape who is subject to them. It is worth noting finally that Good Boy is also genuinely funny in places, and that this comedy is not incidental to the film's project but central to it. The absurdist humor that emerges from the gap between Chris's stated intentions and his actual methods, from the formal courtesies that are maintained within the household despite the fundamental horror of the situation, from Tommy's sardonic commentary on what is being done to him, is not comic relief. It is the mechanism by which the film makes its moral critique. We laugh because the situation is absurd, and in laughing, we implicate ourselves in something. We recognize the logic of Chris's project even as we find it monstrous because we live in a world that applies versions of that logic routinely to people who look and sound a lot like Tommy. The comedy is the film's way of making that recognition uncomfortable and productive at the same time. Good Boy is, in short, a significant and substantial achievement. A film that takes real risk with form and tone, that trusts its audience to sit with genuine moral ambiguity, and that delivers both at the level of craft and at the level of ideas. It confirms Jan Komasa as a filmmaker of major international importance and introduces his work to a new and broader audience. It adds Stephen Graham to the growing list of actors whose work here will be spoken of in the same breath as their finest performances. And it takes up questions that matter about rehabilitation, about power, about the violence embedded in even our most benevolent social institutions, and handles them with the intelligence, the honesty, and the courage that they deserve. Whatever one concludes about its final sequence, Good Boy is a film that demands to be seen, thought about, and argued over at length. That may be the highest compliment that can be paid to any work of cinema.